Quilting your bag isn't as hard as you may think. On this video, I'm going to show you how to fussy cut your pattern pieces for making a bag, how to pattern match your pattern pieces for quilting a bag, and all the tips and tricks for quilting a bag as we go through. So let's get stuck in. Starting off, I like to lay out the fabric on as big a space as possible. I am using the pattern from me at Studio 77 called the Hobana for this video. You can find links to this in the description along with the fabric that I have used. I'm also using quilting cotton, but when quilting a bag, you can use faux leather, waterproof canvas, or really any fabric that you can use to make a bag. I do recommend you start off with quilting cotton though for your first go at quilting a bag. The first thing to do is to choose which part of the fabric you want as your focal point. And then I'm going to find the middle of it, which for me is this snake. I also recommend you check that you can fit all of the outside pieces into your length of fabric before you move along. So I've measured the height and width of the snake, and I'm also marking this with a small cross with a chalk marker. Friction pens are also good for this, but be careful as sometimes they can come back after being erased in cold temperatures. So once I've marked the middle, I then mark the middle of the pattern piece, and then I lay the two so that they are matching up. This is why it's helpful to have a small cross rather than a dot on your fabric so that you can check it is straight, matching along the design and the edge of your folded pattern piece. Once you're happy it is in the right place, I recommend that you then pin your template to your fabric. That's why you should start off using quilting cotton because it's much easier because you can pin it. You may be able to clip your design if you're using a faux leather, or even you can use those magnetised tiles to hold it in place too. You will see in a second that I have yet to add the stabiliser to the fabric, although I have already added the interfacing. This bag is quite a slouchy look, so I'm using fusible fleece. And I'm placing it at this stage because I don't want to add fusible fleece to the wrong areas of the fabric because I want to utilise this fabric as much as possible, and it also stops me wasting any of the stabiliser too. Once it's in the right place, I then pin around the pattern piece to secure the stabiliser to the back so that I can move it over to be fused in a minute. I also mark around the pattern piece with at least an inch space. When quilting, it will shrink the fabric a little, so this is why it's important to mark out the pieces first and then quilt second. At this point, I also realised I wanted this pattern piece in particular to be flipped, as it's the same pattern piece for the front and the back of the bag, and I wanted to have this snake in the middle of both. So once I've marked out all the pattern pieces that I want to, I fuse the stabiliser to the back of the fabric, and then it's time to plan the quilting. But if you're wanting to pattern match any pieces, do one pattern piece first, and I'll show you how to do the pattern matching in a little bit. For this bag, I am doing a very simple diagonal line or squares formation for the quilting. It's probably the easiest design that you can do, and it helps to leave the print do the talking while still adding an extra interest and texture. To draw the first line, I use that cross that I marked in the middle of the design to use my quilting ruler and the marked 45-degree angle on it to draw the first line. I've decided that for this bag, I'm going to do 2-inch squares. So I'm just using the ruler and moving along to mark 2-inch space lines across the area that I had planned out earlier. Once I've drawn all the lines going in one direction, I can swivel the ruler around and do the same as I did for that first line, using the 45-degree angle on the ruler to draw lines going in the opposite direction. Again, all equally spaced at 2-inch. I'm just going to stop the video for a second because I know that the world of bag making comes with a whole load of whats. What interfacing should I use? What stabiliser should I use? And for which project? Where? What are the difference between them all? What about needles and zips? That is why I started the 77 Club. The 77 Club is a whole community of bag makers all on their bag making journey, just like you. There's a library of content that you can dip in and out of, binge it if you like, or just get it when you need your next tutorial. There's a world of inspiration in there too with our monthly guest speakers, and our social Zooms is where the community is at, where you can meet your fellow makers. So why not take a look? We'd love to see you over in the 77 Club so you can level up your bag making and meet others on the same journey too. Simply use the code QUILTING on the link in the description below and you can get half off your first month. All right, let's get back into the video. And then it's time to quilt it. This part is actually pretty simple. I just stitch each line I have marked on. I pivot at the chalk line edge of the pattern piece. Remember, this is bigger than the pattern piece to allow for shrinkage. I don't worry about back stitching or tying off threads as they go into the seam allowance and are pretty secure when your bag is made up. You can, however, add a little bit of fray check at the end of each stitch line after you've cut the pattern piece out in a minute. I like to have the needle finish in the down position to help keep the line straight when you're pausing to readjust. And you just keep on stitching. I like to stitch all going in one direction and then I swivel and do all the lines going in the other direction. I don't stop and cut the threads. I try and keep them as one continuous stitch line. It actually saves on threads and it makes the process quicker. For this I am using Tex 35 thread, which makes the stitches pop as it is a lot thicker than regular thread. It's a bonded polyester. I've popped a link to a video I did on this thread in the description below. Okay, now that the quilting is done, it is time for the actual pattern pieces to be cut out. So again, matching up the middle of the template to that mark that I made with the chalk pen, I can cut out the template exactly. Like I said earlier, this eliminates any shrinkage doing it this way round, even though it can be a little bit bulky with all of that fabric to quilt. You will thank yourself if you do it this way. Now, I like to use a rotary cutter. My table has a huge cutting mat on it, but of course you can mark and cut it with scissors as well. Totally your prerogative. And because I need to cut out another that matches, I'm also repeating this by flipping the pattern over and again cutting it out with the rotary cutter. Now let's talk about pattern matching. To do this, you might need to do a little bit of a scavenger hunt to find the right part of the print on your fabric. This bag has a front slip pocket that I want to look as pattern matched as possible, even though I know it's not going to be exact. So this is the other pattern piece that I want to flow into the first pattern piece print-wise and visually. The red line you can see is where the first pattern piece will sit when finished, so I can use this as a point of reference when trying to match the print. Scoring the pattern piece to be able to fold the seam allowance out of the way can really help to line up the designs. You can see here I'm also going to add pins along that line to help me visually see where one ends and the other pattern piece will start. Now, it took me a little while to find part that I was happy with for this pattern piece, but more importantly, I also had the space for this to be cut from. I thought I had found it here, but actually I ended up choosing the area to the left of it. It's important to definitely spend some time choosing well for this because, of course, you cannot go back once you've cut it. Once chosen, see how I folded back the edge so I can see how it will line up. I do the same as before. Mark a larger area around it and then draw the lines before stitching. I actually used the first pattern piece to mark where the quilt lines are so that I could have the stitch lines also flowing in the same direction and the same angle so that it goes neatly together when it's made up into the bag. And now, of course, we're going to quilt those pieces up just like we did before. I actually cut these pieces down from the main fabric so that it's easier to sew on the machine. Now that I know I don't need to cut any more pieces from the extra fabric that's left. It's a little easier to see the quilting on this piece. You can see that I pivot at each edge and continue on like I mentioned earlier. And now it's time to pattern match again ahead of actually cutting out this second pattern piece. Again, I'm using the lines on the template to guide me and I'm matching up the quilting lines from that first piece that I cut out. I wanted to also show you pattern matching for a straight edge, which is the simplest pattern matching you can do. The strap for this bag is quite long, and as I had to fussy cut the main pieces, I had to piece it together 2 lengths to make this long strap. So to match up, I fold back the seam allowance just like we did before, and I am trying to match up that pattern as much as possible. I like to use double-sided sewing tape to help secure the fabrics together when I've got it all exactly how I want it, and that keeps it held together ahead of the sewing and to keep all the pattern matching as much as possible between moving it from the table to the machine. Once it's stuck, you can then stitch it in place and cut off the seam allowance. If you're having to piece a strap like this, you will of course have to add your seam allowance into your length as well. To help cover this kind of hack, I'm going to cover this line with a label so it draws the eye to the label and not to the seam line. It almost makes it look like it's meant to be. And so now I have all of my pattern pieces that I need for the outside. I of course, like I mentioned, repeated this process for the other larger and smaller piece to make the outside of this bag, and I'm ready to sew it up. If you found this video helpful, please do consider subscribing, and why not share it with some of your sewing friends as well. And if you'd like to see the full tutorial for sewing this bag or are curious as to what it looks like finished, I will pop a link on the screen for this bag when it's released so you can click the link to head on over and watch. I'll see you there.